thank you.
Excellent. Right. Good evening, everybody. My name's Bandy. Born and bred in Northampton. As I said, that was my maternal side, the Austins, who had the dyers and cleaners. The Austins go back into the mists of time, and in about 1470, we had a couple of members of the family who were it was the same member of the family actually, who was the mayor of Northampton in about 1475. If we go on the paternal side, there's a Robert de Bandy, who was the bailiff of Northampton, which was the sort of pre-mayor thing. And we go back. I went to Dusson Upper. I then joined the army as a youngster, as a musician in the 2nd Battalion, the Royal Anglian Regiment. Spent 7 years with them, came out, went to the General and Crispin's and did my nurse training, and I went back in as a nursing officer. So I've got a bit of a weird background, as Jean was alluding to. I'm going to try and cram in as much as I can. It's quite interesting, but it's quite involved. Had a book come out in January. Excellent Christmas present for anybody. Identifying Cat Badges, a Family Historian's Guide, published by Pen and Sword. It can be found on all good booksellers and on Amazon. There are some stonking reviews on the Pen and Sword website. There's 31 marvellous reviews. Who Do You Think You Are magazine, Family Tree magazine. It doesn't just do cat badges, it dates all the uniforms for you. So you've got a picture of Great Uncle Fred and you wonder who he is, where he is. This will show you how to date that photograph and when he was about. So anyway, cat badges. We'll start with them because it's an easy bit to start with. Badges for the forces go back into time immemorial. If you go back to Greece, ancient Greece, the badge of Athens was the owl of Athena. So that was always shown as the badge of Athens. Coming forward, the Iceni had a horse on their coins. We knew they were the Iceni because of the horse. You can go forward a bit further. The Romans had their standards with their battle honours dangling from them, and on their standards they had whichever legion they were, a name like Legion 20 Victrix or something, and they had a various sort of pictures of animals or some of the device to show they were Legion 20 Victrix. Come forward a bit further, we can see that everybody had their heraldry, and it was so well known that this piece of doggerel, the cat, the rat, and love our dog do rule all England under a hog, because they took it for granted that everybody knew that the device of Richard III was in fact a white boar. So therefore, here's 3 retainers, Catesby, Ratcliffe, and Lovell, all had their own devices, but they ruled England under the hog, i.e. Richard III, and that was pinned to a church door. So we know that it is a thing that everybody knew about. Another one that was known about, of course, was the Bear and Ragged Staff of Warwick, and this was the device of Warwick himself during the War of the Roses, or the Cousins' War, and it was still seen on the Warwickshire Police Badge, the Warwickshire Yeomanry, and the Royal Warwickshire Regiment. So it's something that is carried on through time, and it has a lot of meaning to the regiments. Now, we're looking at the 17th, 18th century, actually. Don't take any notes of that. That's a typo. 18th century headgear, 18th century uniforms. So we've got the 48th on the right and the 58th on the 48th on the left and 58th on the right. At this time, up until 1751, they were all known by the name of the colonel of the regiment. So this was Colonel Cholmondeley's regiment, the 48th, the Northamptons, as they became. But in 1751, George II said, no, I've had enough of this. Every time the name of the colonel changes, they have to change the regiment. Let's all give them numbers, and they'll be known by that numbers, and we'll give them some sort of affiliation to a county. So the 48th of Foot became the Northamptons. On the right, the 58th were the Rutlandshires. Now, This badge is actually a collar dog, which was actually used as a cat badge for the Northamptons, but it gives you the way it changes and way things are. The top left, the Queen Victoria crown. Top right, the King's crown. As you can see there, the Queen Victoria crown bows out at the side. The King's crown, which is what we're going to get again now, of course, is the Tudor crown, and it has the sort of just a nice rounded bit. The Queen Elizabeth crown, as these are just easy ways to describe them because they cover the dates. They aren't the proper names of these crowns, but it does help to put a date on it. So the Queen Elizabeth crown has a slightly more rounded top to it as opposed to the sticky out bit of the Victorian one. And most of the badges are newer and are made of a monkey metal called anodized aluminium during this date. And of course, there's also another sort of crown, which is at the bottom, which is an imperial crown. And this is actually a Victorian badge from about 1881. You can tell because the Rutlandshire inverted horseshoe at the bottom is right on the St. George's cross and not at the bottom of the badge as it is on all the rest of them. So we know it's an earlier one, but we know it's post 1881 because of the changes that happened in 1881. All the regiments were given a friends to mate up with in 1881 under the reforms that came in, and the 48th were allied with the 58th. So the 48th, being a lower number, became the 1st battalion, and the 58th became the 2nd battalion, with the depot on Barrack Road in Northampton. Some of you may remember it. So let's have a look at some of these hats. You won't see these on photographs because these are well before it. This is the first pattern shako, but these are the type of hats you'll see. These were from 1800 to 1812. And here we have a picture of the 48th of Talavera, the Battle of Talavera, in July 1809. This is where they steadied the line and where it was about to break, came into the gap and beat off the French columns and beat them off. Unfortunately, the colonel at the time, Colonel Donnellan, was actually shot and mortally wounded. And he said to his second in command, "You will have the pleasure of leading the Northamptons in the charge," which he duly did. So, excuse me, you can see this is a big stovepipe with a peak and a general badge that you can see on there, with a bit sticking down the back just as a bit of a neck cover. But in the Peninsular War, yeah, they wouldn't all be in these clean clothes. They were a complete ragtag army. A lot of the stuff was held up in Lisbon, in Portugal, couldn't get through to the troops, especially the medical supplies. But interestingly enough, even in those days, if you had a traumatic amputation of a limb, if you could get to a field hospital, your chances of survival were about 75% still. So it's quite an interesting time, and not as quite as bad as they would have you believe. And it's not all leeches, but it was quite good. So this is another one. This is the second pattern shako, which was in from 1855 to 1861. Now, of course, we've got more photographs now, and you can see there's a star shape with a crown and little tuft. Now, this is a very, very small photograph that I've got, and here it is in full view. And this is Ensign, which is like a lieutenant, later Lieutenant Colonel D.A. Anderson of the 58th Foot. As you can see, huge whiskers on him, which were very popular at the time. And you can see a sash coming from his left shoulder to his right side. Now, some people may let you think that this is a sergeant's sash, but the sergeant's sash went from the right shoulder to the other side. And it wasn't until 1900 that that sash was transferred back to the waist. Another interesting thing you can see is the cuffs. At first glance, a lot of people say, "Oh dear, well, that's a guard's uniform," because that's what they're used to seeing today, with the 3 buttons, etc. But this is a line infantry regiment at the time. Black facings on the uniform, allegedly in memory of General Wolfe, who died in the arms of a Northamptonshire officer, and also that Wolfe was actually a member of the 58th at one point as well. He died at the Heights of Abraham at the Battle of Quebec, beating the French again, as we do. Now, this is from that second shako there. This is another ranks one. And as you can see, the number of the regiment is front and center, 48. You expected to know exactly which one was which, because this is something called the order of precedence. And it wasn't the Guards at the beginning. The first of foot is actually the Royal Scots. And they'd been around so long, they've got nicknamed as Pontius Pilate's bodyguards. And then second of foot, third of foot, it went on. Seventh of foot, the Royal Fusiliers, 10th of foot, the Norfolks, 17th of foot, the Leicesters, and so it went on. And every book that you come across, so if you want to look up Uncle Fred's cap badge, oh, I wonder what he was in. There are some marvelous weighty tomes out there, very worthy, but every single one prior to mine has done it in this order of precedence. So the only way you can find a match for your badge is to go through up to 2 volumes of several thousand badges, which will take you a week, 2 weeks, whatever, trying to match what you've got. What I've done is actually say, well, what do you see? Do you see a star? Do you see a horse, etc.? So I've made it a lot easier with my book. And all this information that I'm giving out is actually in there as well. So it's great. It's the book I wanted as a child, and it's the book I wanted as a young collector of badges and things, because I didn't know what half of them were. But it tells you very easily, but we'll come across that in a bit. So anyway, this is the Shako badge, 48th. And here is another picture from the 1860s. These are all from my collections, of course, all the pictures that you'll see. All the photographs I have the original copies for. And as you can see, we don't know who they are initially, but very kindly, they're all showing their hats, and we can see a 48 on there. So we know that they are the 48th of foot. We know it's prior to 1881 when they were amalgamated with the 58th. We know by the types of uniform that they are around about the 1850s, possibly early 60s. The type of cap tells us that, and the levy dress or patrol dress which they are wearing. It looks a bit like a jacket you'll find on some hussars or something, but they're not. These are actually infantry soldiers from the 48th foot, and the colours are there at the back. Here's a bit of a close-up on that. Another thing you can tell about these being officers is that soldiers weren't allowed to have their watch chains showing on their uniform. But as we can see, each one of these officers, virtually to a man, have their watch chains showing, which is interesting. It's the same with handkerchiefs. If you remember Sherlock Holmes and his first meeting with Watson, he knew Watson was an ex-soldier in the books, not on the TV series, because he had his handkerchief up his cuff, which is the sign of a soldier, because they weren't allowed to have their pockets used. So here we go again. Now, this is the later one from 1869 to 1878. You'll see these with the 24th of foot at Rorke's Drift in the film Zulu, or in Zulu Dawn. Interestingly, the 24th of foot were not a Welsh regiment. They were, in fact, the 2nd Battalion of the Warwickshires, which is quite interesting. But they did amalgamate, and after 1881, they were the South Wales Borderers. But at the time of Rorke's Drift, they were not Welsh, they were Warwicks. So that's an interesting one. You can see the way the badges become more ornate. The number is still there in the middle. That's still got a big bowing out of the crown for the Queen Victoria stuff. So that's quite interesting. Now, here we have what we call the Glengarry badges. Now, these were about from 1874 to 1881. Now, you can see on the left-hand one, the 48 again, but now it's saying Northamptonshire quite patently on the garter thing, and it's got a crown. Now, interestingly, the amount of the collar badges and the Glengarry badges that featured a crown, when the Northamptons were never actually a royal prefixed regiment. They were never the Royal Northamptonshire Regiment, and they didn't become royal until 1960 when they amalgamated with the Lincolns, but that's further down the line. On the other side, we have a castle on the top, a key, a flag, and the motto, Montis Insignia Calpi. This is because the 58th of Foot were involved in the Great Siege of Gibraltar, where they kept back the French and the Spanish from the Rock of Gibraltar, and all the Gibraltar regiments that were there at the time, the longest siege in military history, were awarded the castle of the Keep of Gibraltar, the motto, Montis Insignia Calpi, the key to the Mediterranean, and the flag, because the flag always flew there. You'll see some of the other castle badges in a bit, but this is why the Northampton badge has always had a castle on it, and why it's always had the key on it. It's not Northampton Castle, as Wikipedia would have you believe. I tried to change it, but they wouldn't have it. It was put in by some ridiculous type person who didn't know what they were talking about with badges. They were actually talking about mobs, and they say that his collar badges show the castle of Northampton. No, it doesn't. So beware of Wiki and things therein. Now, this is the Home Service helmet. These are the police helmet type things that you'll see around. The bands were wearing them as well of late. I wore one. They got a spike on the top. They look a bit German. They look a bit like a coal scuttle. Now, what they did, cleverly, the army always looking for ways to save money, they had the same badge on the outside. I don't know if you can see this cursor. So this outer bit with the crown was always the bit, was the same. Can you see the crown, Jean? Can you see the crown?
Yep.
Yeah. Can you see the cursor, I mean? Can you see the cursor? Excellent. And what they did, they changed the centre for each regiment. So, of course, I've got a few extra ones down here. Now, the Bedfordshire one with the heart, the East Surrey one with Guildford Castle, and the Northamptonshire one, as we've got here. As they came in, these are post-1881 badges, they will say Gibraltar, they've got the Castle of Gibraltar, but it says Northamptonshire. That tells you it's post-1881. So we know what it is. These lasted until 1914, when all scarlets and the Home Service helmets were withdrawn because of the war. These helmet plates didn't get reintroduced with a modern Queen's crown until 1978. And again, a lot of them, or most of them, were lost again in 1992 when they disbanded all the regimental bands. And most of them were, just about every single one was lost, unfortunately. Well, let's go on in time a little bit more. Now, what we've got here is a Glengarry. As you can see, this is the earlier Glengarry, which came in 1874, as we said earlier. But from 1881, they wore this badge. So it's the centre of the helmet plate, but with a crown above it. And you can see the actual thing here, where there's separate crown at the top and this. You can see the ribbons down the back. Now, a lot of people say, oh, he's Scottish. But no, these are Northamptons. Very interesting time. Scottish stuff was quite in vogue. John Brown was looking after Queen Victoria, and she was into tartan, and she had a piper and everything else. So, of course, the army liked to please the Queen. So what they did, they got everybody in the line infantry regiments wearing these as an undress thing. Not for full dress, of course. This is just a sort of working dress. And these lasted until 1895. Interestingly, this picture is from 1895 itself. I've actually got the original, and it's a huge picture, which I'll show you in a bit. And you can just about see a different type of hat here. And these field service caps with the two buttons at the front, the peak, and the collar badge down here in the left-hand corner, these were introduced, and they superseded this Glengarry. Here we have full dress in, well, it's actually walking out dress. And this again, 1881 to 1895, because he's got the Northampton helmet plate centre in the here and the crown above. He's also got these cuffs. Now, if you remember the old Dundee white jam jars, Keelers, whatever they were, you will see that they look like this. So these are known as jam pot cuffs. And these tell you that these are pre-1901, because in 1901, the uniform changed. So we know it can't be after wrong. It can't be after 1901, and it can't be before 1881. So this starts to give you a window for what's going on. Now you'll see he's got a stick in his hand. This is called a walking out cane or a regimental cane. These are not for officers. These are other ranks and used for walking out. There was a specific stick drill which everybody used. They were there to keep their hands out of the pocket and to keep them smart and to give them an amount of swagger as they marched around town. They were let out of camp from 6 o'clock in the evening onwards, down the pub, etc., but they always had to carry a cane while they're in uniform. The civilian term of swagger stick is what's stuck in the public consciousness, but their proper name is regimental or walking out cane. I've still got a book of orders, standing orders for the Northamptons from 1920, and they're saying that all ranks must carry a regimental cane when walking out of camp in uniform. Officers don't normally walk out of camp in uniform. They go out in civilian clothes, but other ranks didn't. So that's when you see one of these sticks and somebody says, oh, it's an officer. No, it's not. You can see he's got what's known as the Slade Wallace belt here, this white belt. Sometimes they have a regimental device. Sometimes they just say du mon droit on the outside of that belt, and you can see them quite nicely. This one was taken in Northampton. It's quite obviously it's a Northampton chap. So, and of course, at this time, from 1881 onwards, anybody who was non-royal, didn't have a royal prefix to their regimental name, had these buff facings. Regimental facings came back a bit later. Now, the field service cap of 1895. As you can see, it looks like a chip bag, as we would call it these days, or have called it of late. It's got a little peak here at the top, 2 wide space buttons, and a collar badge stuffed on here. Rare as Rockinall's doings they are, and you can't get one for love nor money. Luckily, last week on eBay, one popped up, and instead of the 100 or so odd pounds I was expecting to pay, I got a nice original one for £13.99. So I was very happy with that. A nice original 1895 field service cap. Going on to the next page, this is the group photograph showing the field service cap, and there's our friend at the back here with his Glengarry on still. A number of Glengarrys, a number of 1895 field service caps. Very interesting. The white trousers are because it's hot. These are tropical wear. The light sand-coloured tunics are what's known as khaki drill. They are used in climes where you will find them south and or east of Gibraltar. So, you know, this light cotton stuff, it wasn't all the wool stuff all the time. This is the type of stuff you would have seen in the First and Second Boer War as well. So all the insignia was detachable, so the Dobie Wallers could clean them. This is Jalunda in 1895. And this is the mounted infantry section, as it was then. Now, here's another one, a bit clearer, but it's got the field service cap on, walking out dress. He has his regimental cane again. He's still got the jam pot cuffs, so we can put this into a 5-year window. It cannot be before 1895, and it cannot be after 1900. So if you've got a chap on one of your family photographs, and you'll say, oh, I wonder where he is. Sometimes there's a thing on the back of the photograph to say where it was. Sometimes there's a bit on the front, and sometimes it's even embossed, and you can find where the photographer was. But his records can be found on Find My Past. They are under War Office File 97. This is the pre-1913 discharges, and the discharges before that are in W096, but they just come up when you put the name in. If you want to go to the National Archives and handle them, they're all in alphabetical order. If you know the name of your chap, there he is, you can find it. I was lucky enough to find my grandfather's file in W097, great big file. And also underneath his was his brother's, my uncle's file, and I didn't even know he was in the army. He had gone down to Taunton to join the Somerset Light Infantry. So don't think they always join the local regiments. They don't. In fact, it's quite the opposite usually. Now, this is the much despised and very much not lamented Broderick cap. It looks like a German First World War field mutz. It's horrible. It's tacky. It was known as that monstrous piece of cloth. You only saw these between 1903 and 1907. They were despised by everybody. There was even a newspaper report that one soldier committed suicide because of the indignity of having to wear this German type cap and being jeered at by men, laughed at by ladies, and he couldn't stand it any longer. And that's the actual story behind it. Now, as you can see, we're beginning to look like a First World War uniform here. In fact, this also came in 1902, but the bandolier they're wearing is the 1899 pattern bandolier. So we know it can't be before 1899. We know it can't be before 1902. We know it can't be after 1907, although the Royal Marines did keep these hats into the Great War. But the other thing we can notice is that these jackets have not brass shoulder titles, but cloth ones, as you can see here on the top end. And they've also got detachable epaulets. So we know this is early days. So this is about 1903 to 1904. Someone's taught him how to do bandages. He's got reverse spiral puttees here. They are tied at the top. If they're tied at the bottom, he works with horses. We shall see one later. If they're tied at the top, he works on his feet, usually infantry. So these are the pointers, and you can start seeing the First World War stuff. Now, with the Brodericks, did last a bit longer in India. I've got pictures of the Northamptons in 1908 wearing Brodericks, or some of them were. But they were, as I say, that monstrous piece of cloth. And that's why so very, very few have survived to this day. There are a few in museums and a few in private hands, but they are very, very few and far between. In 1907, a new cap was put in for walking out. Now, the old and bold amongst you, Chris, I'm looking at you because I know you're here watching, will recognise this as a #1 dress cap. It was just a walking out cap, forage cap from 1907. Again, the walking out cane, but we can see the jam pots have gone, and we've got these pointy cuffs now. And there's a bit more extra cloth on here, a bit of white braiding or buff braiding, and there's an embossed photographer's thing here down the bottom, on the bottom right. But again, walking out gear, 1907 to 1914. You've got a 7-year window for this photograph because of the hat, the cuffs, and everything else. So it's really, really good to know when these soldiers were about. It can't be before 1907, and it can't be after 1914, because all of these scarlet uniforms were withdrawn and taken off the soldiers. Now, here's something a little bit different. Just to throw something into the mix, these look a bit German, like Uhlans, don't they? But they're not. These are actually the 12th Lancers in Canterbury. Again, he's got the peaked cap on, and he's got this stuff on, so we know it's between 1907 and 1914. It can't be before 07. It can't be after 1914, because all these ceremonial uniforms were all taken off them. It's also saved money for the War Office as well, which is probably another reason. Something a little bit different. These are rifle volunteers. These from about 1904 on the left, and 1907 to 1914. Well, 1907 to 1908 on the right. He's got the peak cap. He's a sergeant major. This is the old way of having a sergeant major. He's got this in rifle grey, the uniform. Now, they did used to have these uniforms with this Astrakhan cap on this chap here, on this bandsman on the left. In the Regimental Museum. I haven't seen what the new Regimental Museum is like now. They've moved to Guildhall Road and turned the Hampton Park Museum into a wedding venue. But they used to have these in there. You used to be able to see them. But in 1908, there was another load of reforms which came in, and the territorial force was formed. So all of these rifle volunteers were all turned into territorials and parts of the militia and everything else that the army had at that time. So volunteer battalions became the 4th Battalion, territorials. 3rd Battalion was the militia, but a lot of these kept sort of rifle thing going on. This crossbelt is with the whistle is very much a rifles things. The Rifle Volunteers was a movement which started in 1869 because of another French threat, as we've always had at some point or other. Interestingly, the 21st century is the only century that we haven't had a scrap with the French. Those of you who are thinking, well, in the 20th century, well, yes, because we had to fight the Vichy French in North Africa and in Madagascar. So yeah, it's the only century so far in British history where we haven't had to fight the French. But yeah, rifle grey, Astrakhan caps in grey. This is their camp. This is the Sergeant Major. He's wearing all the badges of the Northamptons, but he's still in his rifle volunteer. So it's about 1907, 1908, that one. Easy to date, but the lighter colour is actually grey. Ah, what have we got here? A bunch of Australians, I hear you say. Really? Be very careful on sweeping comments and presumptions. Always go to the village of facts. Don't divert yourself to the village of presumptions and assumptions, because they are villages to be avoided. Because if we scroll back on this photograph a little bit, we will see it's the 1st Volunteer Battalion, the Northamptonshire Regiment in Farnborough in 1906. The British Army have always worn slouch hats. From the 1880s onwards, you will see the British Army in slouch hats somewhere in the world. And this is at home. This is in Farnborough. Marvellous picture of the corps of drums here at in front of the horses. The white cap on top of the officer in the centre in the blues here, what the old soldiers would call number 1s, but it's a patrol dress, shows you it's in summer, which is confirmed by the date August 1906, because the white top of the cap in this dress is always to say that this is summertime, because it's like the Royal Navy. In the summer, they had a white cap on the top. In the winter, they took it off. But that was officers only with the army. So that's a very interesting thing. Now, this one always foxes people, because as soon as they see it, they see the bandolier, which is the 1903 pattern. They see the white lanyard, and they see the spurs. And the first thing somebody will tell you that is Royal Horse Artillery. It's not. Then they'll tell you it's Royal Field Artillery. It's not. Then they'll say, well, it must be Royal Artillery because he's got a white lanyard. It's not. Well, they say it must be that because it's your First World War picture. It's not. This is what I say about going to the village of facts and not to and diverting yourselves for the village of assumptions and presumptions, because this is a 1930s pic of a Northampton chap. How do we know that? First of all, the peak on this service dress cap is absolutely ginormous. As you can see, it looks like a World War I uniform, but it's not. There are subtle differences. What you can't see is that from the collar to these patches on the top of the tunic, there is only one seam. During the Great War and up until 1921, there were two. He is mounted, he's got spurs on, but as I was saying earlier about the puttees, which are these things wrappings around the legs, these were started at the top and wound their way down to the bottom where they were tied off. This is to stop them coming undone on the flanks of the horses. You can see his butterflies, you can see the spurs, you can see the lanyard, and he's also got collar dogs on, which 99.99% of the time you would not see on the infantry during the First World War. So we know this has to be past the First World War, but with this uniform, we know it has to be past 1921. It can't be any earlier. Look at the fit of it. It's a really nice fit. So we know that this is a chap, because the Spurs and everything else is late 20s, early 30s, with the transport section, or the military transport, which became in 1937 when the British Army motorised and mechanised the motor transport section, because the army used horses all the way through up to 1937 when they all started being lorried around everywhere. So don't discount anything. And you can see on his hat, it's quite patently a Northampton cap badge. So this is always the fun to have with this. If it's got a big peak, it's post 1921. Now, a lot of badges feature all sorts of things. A tiger on both of these. We know the Leicesters, we know the Hampshires, who are now part of the Squidges. The Princess of Wales Royal Regiment, we all know what they're called, Squidgy. James Gilby calling Princess Diana Squidgy on the tapes. So that has stuck in the army. Everybody started taking the mickey out of the Princess of Wales Royal Regiment, and they became known as the Squidges to the rest of the British Army. They have adopted the title the Tigers. The Leicesters were always the Tigers, but they've decided that they're going to be the Tigers now. So unfortunately, the Leicesters as a separate entity disappeared in about 1976 when they became part of the 2nd Battalion, the Royal Anglian Regiment. Up until then, they were the 4th Battalion, but they were the only one that sort of kept their identity without amalgamation into the 1970s. Here we go now with the Dorsets. Note the castle is very much the same as the Northampton one here. This is the regimental castle, which came in 1900. The standardised castle, which came in 1900. Again, the key to Gibraltar. They've also got an Egyptian Sphinx here, and they're also known as Primus in Indus, first in India. But the castle, from a distance, could look like it's the Northamptons. With the Sphinx on top, it could be the Essex, but we'll see them in a minute. This is the regimental castle. It either had 2 or 3 turrets in a completely different way. Of course, they were at Gibraltar during the Great Siege. Here we are with the Northampton one. The top one on the left is the early one. The flag still flying. It's got a long key here going all the way through Talavera, which is the 48th Battle Honour, Gibraltar 58th. So, and here, the standardised castle. There's the difference. On the right, in the bigger picture, you'll see it says 4th Battalion and South Africa 1900 to 1902. They were volunteers who went out to fight in the Second Boer War, and they got their own little battle honour because they did quite well themselves. So the territorial force, as it was, it didn't become the territorial army till much later after the Great War, carried on this tradition and had slightly different badges with slightly different battle honours if you compare and contrast. But it's all in the detail. Here's another odd one. I didn't know what this was to start with when I first got hold of this, because I saw the badge on this photograph and I thought, what on earth's that? I then went looking for it. It's the only Bible on collar badges was one by a chap called Ray Wilkinson. Marvellous book. Again, you've got to know what you're looking for. And he said, well, possibly we don't know what this is. We might know what it is. It might be the Daventry Volunteers during the Great War, Volunteer Training Corps, which was, in essence, the Great War Home Guard. So we've got here a chap who's from Northampton, but he's got a little T above here. So that means the territorials are taking him on. So that means with this badge, being an old Northamptonshire Volunteer Training Corps, is post 1918 because he's got the T on here and he hasn't got the coloured uniform you would expect of a VTC, which again was a sort of a greyish colour. There is a marvellous book on the VTC in Northamptonshire in the record office, which I found whilst looking for something else, and got it catalogued because it wasn't catalogued, but it was brilliant. If you get a chance, go and have a look at it up at Mere Way. Again, as I said about the Essex, oh dear, there's a Sphinx at the top. They've got oak leaves and not laurels. Again, these can be confused. Lots of sellers of eBay photographs will tell you, oh, it's a Northampton badge, or oh, it's an Essex badge, when it's, in a sense, vice versa, or even a Dorset one. Again, the Essex were at Gibraltar, and they were awarded the castle. Again, this is the post-1900 one. Again, it's the post-1908, because the blank scroll here tells you it's a territorial one, because it doesn't say Egypt, because the territorials weren't awarded that. And they were a bit precious about some of their battle honours in those days for the battalions. Here's an interesting one. Now, it's a light infantry thing, but this has got a CR in the middle. That's got a rose in the middle. Why? Because the one on the left is the Connaught Rangers, and the one on the right is the King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry. Again, there's subtle differences. The top of the circle of the bugle horn is slightly different. The bugle horn is normally associated with light infantry of some description. Connaught Rangers, well, they weren't light infantry, but again, rifle volunteers for the Connaught Rangers. So the bugle horn was retained in 1881. King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry have also always been in the jackets of green and marching at double pace. So there's an interesting thing, because this is where things start to get problematic. Here we go again. Is this the same badge? No, not quite, because the one on the left has got little things for the bugle cords to hang on. The one on the right hasn't. The rest of it's quite almost the same, but it's slightly different. But what are they? Believe it or not, the one on the left is the Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry, and the one on the right is the Ox and Bucks Light Infantry. To add problems to the Ox and Bucks Light Infantry, there was a Buckinghamshire battalion, which was a territorial battalion, which had a completely different badge. Just to make it a bit more awkward for you, it's absolute pain in the bum over it. But as you can see here, there are problems with this, and you just got to go. This is why a book where it says, oh, well, this is a marvelous book, but it's in order of precedence, will take you forever. After much wailing and gnashing of teeth with my publishers and their proofreaders, and 6 proofs that it went to, I managed to get the photographs of what looks almost the same next to each other, rather than splattered across about another half a dozen pages, which I told them destroyed the actual point of the book. Now it's almost there. They did make a couple of mistakes from the typos they made, but if you buy the book, I can alter them for you for free. So there's more problems there. Now, what have we got here? A Welshman, because you can see the Prince of Wales feathers there, can't we? Or is it? These are all Prince of Wales feathers badges, with a scroll at the bottom or not. None of them are Welsh. Now, the Prince of Wales feathers were reputedly captured from blind King John of Bohemia by the Black Prince at the Battle of Cressy, reputedly. And that's why he wears them. And from then onwards, and anything that's got the feathers on is looked upon kindly by the Prince of Wales. Now, the first one on the top left is actually the Civil Service Rifles, which was a pre-First World War unit and went on into the First World War. Leinsters, Irish 3rd Dragoon Guards, 10th Royal Hussars, Cheshire Yeomanry, and the 12th Royal Lancers. So they're all not Welsh. Neither are these. Wiltshire Yeomanry, which is looking remarkably like the Civil Service Rifles, apart from the Civil Service Rifles one is in black. The Imperial Hospital Yeomanry, where hospital staff went off and formed their own mounted unit. Yeomanry is basically territorials on horses. There's a long story to the Yeomanry and militia, which I won't go into here for time's sake. But again, 3 feathers, scrolls. What could he be? I mean, interesting one. Then we look onto these, the Donegal Militia and the Royal Hussars. Again, not Welsh. but these are Welsh. The Flint and Denbigh Yeomanry, the Carnarvon and Denbigh Yeomanry, more or less the same thing, but at different eras. Still problematic, still could be, but we don't know. Unless we know the chap's name, I don't think we'll ever know, because that is an original photograph. I always swear by original photographs or scans of no less than 400 to 600 DPI, because you can't make it out. And if you get someone who comes along and says, oh, I'll colour that in for you, they destroy all the insignia on there, so you can't tell what it is. And 99 times out of 100, they stick them in some ridiculous colour of a uniform which was never actually worn. And I think, to my mind, unless you're Peter Jackson and you can do the First World War in colour with all the things he had for that film, it's not worth it, because all the free apps and stuff you've got out there are wrong. They always default to American post office blue for uniforms. So stick to the originals if you can. One on the left, Fishguard. It's got a thing at the bottom, Pembroke Yeomanry. In 1797, the French decided to try and land in Wales and invade Britain. They were seen off by the Pembrokeshire Yeomanry. So they got the battle on a Fishguard. It's the only unit in the British Army that's got a battle on it that was actually won on British soil. So there we go. On the right is the Welsh Brigade, which was a 1958 unit, but it's, of course, it's exactly the same as the Royal Regiment of Wales, which came about from 1992 onwards. Badges come, badges go, badges return. But the brigade badges, a lot of them came back. It was a movement in the 1950s to try and save money. Now, here is a selection of Northampton badges. I've got 35 variations on a cap badge, and this is just some of them. From the all brass economy issue of 1916, the Northampton Citizen Corps down the bottom left, the blue and white enamel one, Oundle School in the middle, Wellingborough Schools down there, the Huntingdonshire Regiment, which became the 5th Huntingdonshire Battalion of the Northamptonshire Regiment in 1921. Its most famous chap was an actor you may have known called Charles Lawton, who was in the 5th Battalion. So there's a selection of them. You can see in the top middle, the circle and the crown above it for the Glengarry badge. A selection of shoulder titles. They're all different. Oundle School, Northampton School, MCS, Magdalen College School in Brackley. These all had their own cadet units, Officer Cadet Corps. So there's a lot out there to find. They're all slightly different, all from slightly different times. And I'm still missing about 5 different ones which are not on there yet. Buttons are the same. There's some silver ones. If you get silver buttons, they're militia buttons or pre-1908 ones, or volunteer ones. Queen's Victoria crowns, King's crown, Queen's crown, and some various other little things. The Sphinx was used on the 2nd Battalion buttons. This one down the bottom here, just above the very last one, you can see 2 the same above the gold one in the bottom centre. They're actually Northampton buttons from 1947 onwards. Chris will probably, who's on here, I've seen him, who was also 2nd Royal Anglians, will recognise them as our collar dogs. The Sphinx with Talavera underneath. No, it's a Northampton button that we had before we joined up with the Lincolns. Northampton collar dogs and other badges. There's just so many out there that you can find. This cross pick and rifle here, down the bottom left and bottom right, were actually worn by the 6th Battalion of the Northamptons. It's because they were a pioneer battalion in the Great War. One Kitchener battalion out of every regiment was allocated as a pioneer battalion. So that was the 6th Battalion. The 7th Service Battalion, of course, was the Mobs Battalion. And they were a Mobs Battalion. So there's all sorts of stuff there. Sweetheart badges and a couple of blazer badges. These were given to your, lady of choice in different eras. Anything from the Queen Victoria Crown ones here. These are nice enamelled First World War ones, up to the top right, where we have a Bakelite one from the Second World War. And on the top left is an old comrade's badge. Mother of pearl, diamante, and silver, all very nice badges. Depends what you can afford, but loads of different ones out there. Royal Anglians, excuse me. This is where the Northamptons turned into. In 1960, they became the 2nd East Anglian Regiment till 1964. Actually, at that point, they had the longest title in the British Army. It was the 2nd Duchess of Gloucester's own Royal Lincolnshire and Northamptonshire Battalion, the East Anglian Regiment. So, complete mouthful, but it was the longest one in the British Army, and it still retains it. These are just badges from the eras from 1960 onwards. The reason why we got the Britannia buttons is because initially, when the East Anglian Regiment was formed, as you can see the badge here, it had the castle. It was on a star with East Anglia on it. And none of the collar dogs at the time were the same. And the poor old Norfolks were feeling a bit hard done by, because they said, well, look at us. We're the 9th of Foot, the 10th were the Lincolns. We need something of ours to say that we're part of this. So they gave them the buttons for a while, but they soon turned into the buttons with the tiger and the laurel wreath on for the Leicesters, and that's how they remain to this day. So there's a Leicester badge, there's a Lincoln's officer's badge, shoulder titles, it's loads. Now, if you can see on here, I've crossed out Grandad Austin on here, because this is one of the photographs that was given to me by my cousin, and said, this is Grandad Austin in the First World War. I said, you what? It's Grandad Austin in the First World War. Look, there's loads of pictures of him. I said, well, it's not. It can't be. She said, why? I said, well, for starters, he was far too young for the Great War. No, he wasn't. Well, yes, he was. When was he born? And she went, oh. So we could see on the photograph, or I could, it's a very small one, that the chap had Northumberland Fusiliers on there. So we had a close look at that, and I thought, that looks like little Uncle Ernie. Now, little Uncle Ernie and little Uncle Fred were two great uncles who were actually in the Great War. They looked nothing like Grandad. And they came from the other side of the family. They came from his then wife's side, my grandside. She was an Attridge. And you can see that this is a bomb on here with flames on the top. It's a tiny, tiny photograph. It's only about 2 inches high. But in these days, the photographs are so well taken, even such a small photograph, you can actually see something that's on there. And because it looks like a grenade with a flame coming out, you think, So, of course, I looked up Ernest Attridge, found it was in the Army Service Corps, and it was also in the Northumberland Fusiliers, because during the Great War, you were sent to where you were needed, and if you were needed from something else to something else, and you were fit, after 1916, you can be sent to any regiment, and I've seen up to 4 different regiments for one chap on a medal card. So it's always something to be aware of. It could be the same chap, but moved in a different regiment. This is what happened to Uncle Ernie and little Uncle Fred. So this is Uncle Ernie. And this is Uncle Fred. As you can see, they are quite alike. But he's got the badge of the Army Veterinary Corps, and he's got Durham Light Infantry. So, of course, when we look for them, we know where to find him, because that's where we can find the medal card. Another thing you can look at, you can see that this shoulder title is virtually straight. On here, it's curved. Basically, if it's a curved one, it's a line infantry one. And if it's a straight one, it's a corps or cavalry. So that's another little thing. And on here, on the right, you can see the 2 seams that I was talking about for the First World War uniform. Now, here's a picture of the 2nd, 4th Northamptons, but only one company. 2nd, 4th, because the 1st, 4th went out to fight the Turks, and unfortunately, a lot of them were lost during the battles in the Middle East. So they had to form a second 4th Battalion. So this is a later one. If I need to stop, Jean or anybody, please do wave at me. Now, what they will say is that this is a young boy. Oh dear, those poor boy soldiers. Look at him in his uniform, and he's a sergeant already, and he can't be more than about 15. Well, he's not. But he's not a soldier. And you'll say, what? No, he's not a soldier. He may be in a uniform. But you can see some funny collar dogs here on his collars, on this right-hand one, and a strange picture there. That is, in fact, the Church Lads Brigade. So do be aware of people saying, oh, it's a boy soldier. No, it's not. It's a cadet or the Church Lads Brigade. During the Great War, even the Scouts, the BB, the CLB, they all wore uniform. Loads of them did. In fact, the Northampton Boy Scouts were actually at Eastcote German prisoner of war camp during the First War, and they formed part of the guards of the Eastcote camp. So do be very, very aware that not is all as it seems at first glance. Now, speaking of the little crossed pick and rifle, and if you look on this bottom seated front right, you can see on his collars the cross pick and rifle. So we know, if you look at all of them, then you'll see them on all of them. These are officers of the 6th Battalion of the Northamptonshire Regiment during the Great War. They do come around, or even though the chap on the right here does a bit look like Captain Darling from Blackadder, I've noticed. He has the same look to his face as well, goodness gracious. But you know, these things happen. Lots of variations in boots, puttees, etc. They're mainly lieutenants from what I can see, but you can see most of them have no cuff ranks because the German snipers were always told to shoot at the blokes with the cuff ranks, which is why they disappeared, or the blokes with the little stick legs, thin legs, because as you can see with the puttees and the breeches, their legs look rather thin, but their pockets are all full of books and stuff. They've also got respirator haversacks on. So we know it's post-1916 because of the respirators. There's his haversack here, and here's the big wide thing for it. Some have got the earlier hypo hoods with them. He's on the right has got a infantry type belt, well, soldier's belt, the 1908 pattern belt. Because from 1915 onwards in the front line, they were told to dress as the men. Interesting. So they didn't get shot. They've also got tin lids on. They didn't come in properly till 16. So we know this is no earlier than 1916. Another member of the family, George Bandy, formerly of Messrs. Birdsall's. There he is on the left, a bit close up from the picture out of the Mercury and Herald as it became, Northampton Heroes of Trones Wood. A lot of them were killed in Trones Wood. Unfortunately, George was killed later on. He's on the War Memorial down at Cotton End. He's the only one we got in the town. But again, 6 Northamptons. The other thing about the 6 Northamptons is that they got 4 VCs in 40 months during the Great War. So they were a hard-fighting unit. 3 of the boys, Bandy, Neil and Sanders, belonged to Northampton. Yes, well, we know that. And he worked at Birdsall's. Here's another chap from Birdsall's, for those who remember it. Your comrades at B&S send fraternal, that's Birdsall and Sons, send fraternal greetings. This Christmas be happy and enjoyable. This is Christmas 1914, and there's the chap to whom it was sent on the left, a chap called Holden. He was a volunteer for the 7th Northamptons, the mob zone. He was one of the first people to join up with mobs, and followed him up from the county ground to the recruiting office. Unfortunately, dear Mr. Holden, it was with great regret I see in the Northampton papers the death of your son, and I'm writing you for something to say how sorry I am for you. Now, if you read at the bottom, it says, yours sincerely, Edgar Mobbs, Lieutenant Colonel. This was a letter that Mobbs wrote. as quick as he could, because it's written on a signal paper, not just on normal writing paper. And this chap actually died at home. And here is the insert from the paper. Corporal Arthur Charles Holden, Northamptonshire Regiment of 44 Stanley Street, Semilong, took place. Buglers firing party from the depot, born on a gun carriage from depot at Weedon. Tells you who they were, floral tributes. Corporal Holden was 33 years of age, entered the employment of Messrs. Birdsall and Son at the age of 11 as a half-timer, and remained with them until he enlisted in the 7th Northamptons at the end of August 14. So yeah, he's one of the mob's originals, of whom not many survived, unfortunately. But then again, a lot of them got broken up and sent up to other places. Don't think that when they say, oh, look, this is a 1918 picture of those that are left who went out. They're the ones that left in the unit. Yes, a lot were lost, but a lot others were transferred and wounded, not just killed. 1931, the 1st Airborne Unit of the British Army, the 1st Battalion of Northamptonshire Regiment. The Iraqi levies were revolting, so the Northamptons were put on Vickers Valletta aeroplanes and shipped all the way to Iraq from Egypt to quell the rebellion, which they did in about 2 weeks. As soon as they turned up out of nowhere with an entire battalion on an aircraft, they couldn't believe it. It was the first time that this had ever happened. And there were some quite strong links between the squadron and the Northamptonshire Regiment at the time and for up to the Second World War. 2nd Battalion, Northamptonshire Regiment. Unfortunately, this one's not all named. As you can see by the date, 1935, but they look like First World War uniforms. They are not, as you can see, because they got the big peaks and they got the collar dogs on. So we know they're not First World War. Home Guard. This is Ardiston Home Guard. And what they've got here is a Vickers cart, a Lewis cart, a Lewis gun cart, where they pull that behind them, get all the ammunition in there because it's a lot easier to carry in one of these carts. It was an invention from the Great War. The reason why we can tell they're Home Guard is because their anklets are made of leather. The officers have got the field service cap on, khaki. Now, this officer in the middle is actually breaking regulations because officers were not supposed to wear service dress, i.e. officers' service dress, as you see here, or Sam Brown's. It seems to be a bit of a thing in Northampton. They actually did. Quite a few did. I've got a number of photographs where they have that. Officers in battle dress up till 1943, Home Guard and regulars, open collar and tie. In the regulars, from August 1944 onwards, anybody can have the open tie and collar because they try to smarten themselves up a bit because of the Yanks in their uniform were pulling all the birds. So to try and make a bit smarter, wear a collar and tie. Everybody could do it from August 44 onwards. So here we go. Ardiston Home Guard with their Lewis gun cart. The first Home Guard band in the British Army. Well, or whatever. These are the Silver Band from Long Buckby, and they joined up en masse and went into the Home Guard, and here they are with their basses, euphoniums, and tenor horn cornets. They are reputedly the first Home Guard band in the British Isles, so whether they were or not, don't know, but it's quite possible. But here they are. The British Army regular troops stopped wearing the field service cap after 1943 because they didn't really want to be associated, people thinking they were Home Guard. As you can see, they haven't got their anklets on here, although they've got this belt on, which is the same. This is the 1903 pattern belt, which was used by the Land Army and the Home Guard during the Second World War. Town Centre Battalion of the Home Guard during the Second War. The 12th Battalion, there's a lovely little book they produced at the end of the war. One of my cousins actually served with the 12th Battalion before getting sent out with the Grenadier Guards to Italy. He landed at Salerno, was promptly captured by the Germans when they were cut off in a factory. But of course, that's all the American General Mark Clark's force because he was rubbish and he wouldn't come off the beach. And by the time he did decide to come off the beach, the Germans had regrouped, and it was a bit of a mess at that time. But that's another story. But there you are. I don't know which building that is, but they are somewhere in the town centre. I have got lots of guff on the Northampton Home Guard. There was a very good book published for the whole of Northamptonshire for the Home Guard, but the 12th Battalion actually produced their own, which is a very nice little green book, and you can find it at times as well. This looks a bit more modern. Woolly pulleys and what appears to be lightweight trousers. They are sort of cotton drill trousers. The early pattern of woolly pulleys. This is actually Korea in 1953. Excuse me. This is the 1st Battalion Corps of Drums. After 1947, the 1st and 2nd Battalion were amalgamated into one battalion. There was no 2nd Battalion, the Northamptonshire Regiment, after 1947. Ergo, the buttons with the Sphinx and the Talavera on them. And this is the Corps of Drums out in Korea. But it's beginning to look a bit more modern. I'm sure Chris remembers this sort of kit with the horrible KF shirts, the woolly pulleys, and lightweight trousers, which wasn't too dissimilar from this, except instead of these anklets that they've got on here, anklets web, we wore puttees. So yeah, it went backwards and forwards a few times. And the last picture says, is of a band, but again, they are in service dress. But again, this is 1954. This is the 5th Battalion Band at Peterborough, being inspected by HRH Princess Alice, the Duchess of Gloucester, who was made the Colonel-in-Chief of the Northamptons from 1937, and she remained a staunch supporter of the Northamptons and latterly the 2nd Royal Anglians up until she died. She was regularly seen after the amalgamations. She became a Deputy Colonel-in-Chief because the Queen Mum became the Colonel-in-Chief of the Royal Anglian Regiment, and as her seniority was more than that of the Duchess of Gloucester, she resolved to go down to the Deputy Colonelship. But here we are with the band, who is actually their successors are still extant at Peterborough. It's the band of the Royal Anglian Regiment, which is the TA band, and they are still there as a band, but they're only a TA band. Unfortunately, all the Royal Anglian bands went in 1992. They were put into the Queen's Division. There was 3 bands from the Royal Anglians, the Queen's Regiment, and the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers from each regiment. So that was 9 bands. They were turned into 2 bands, and now there's only one sort of band, which is the Colchester band or something. I haven't really kept up with them, what they're doing at the moment, because it all changes, and the Corps of Army Music doesn't give you any regimental affiliation. But as you can see here, you can see these huge peaks on these hats, right, big duck-billed things, and the collar badges. This white strap coming across the chest is for the music pouch, which is dangling behind them. And I think that is a quick overview